So I did go that afternoon to the White House. I did ask all the Jews about them. They told me about the falafel and all the other stuff and the archaeology. It was very nice, and I went home. I got back to New York, and Helen was in my camera, and I thought, something's wrong here. What do I do about this? What do I do? Something's wrong. I called up a writer, senior writer at Jewish Week in New York. And I told him what happened, and he said to me 2 words: no news. So I was met with anti-Semitism on the front lawn of the White House and Jewish liberal apathy in New York. But I still thought I should do something with it. I thought I should put it online. People should look at it and see it. See if anybody else finds value with it. Now, we all know that even if you're a multi-billionaire and have 60,000 employees and 3 Lear jets, if you have to put something online, you got to get a 15-year-old to do it. And if you can afford it, get a 12-year-old. But who can afford a 12-year-old? I know I can't. Not a wealthy man. So I was waiting for my son, who was going to help me put it online. But, he was graduating from high school. He had AP, advanced placement physics, and chemistry, and driver ed, and all these different things. And I didn't want to take him away from his studies to put this stuff online and put our website together with the video. So I waited and waited and waited. An entire week went by. Hashgacha pratis, divine providence. Something happened in that week. Something happened in that week was so global and so big and so major that in this morning's newspaper, it's still mentioned. The flotilla from Turkey happened that week. Arab terrorists came over from Turkey, tried to go through the blockade. Israel said, we just want to come on board and take a look at what you've got. They videotaped themselves on board, the terrorists saying, when the Jews come on board, we're going to kill them. Israeli soldiers came on, the Arabs took big metal rods and beat them as they were coming down, threw a couple of the soldiers overboard. Finally, after good beatings, some of the soldiers pulled out their revolver and shot a couple of them and killed them. The entire world was against Israel, condemned Israel. Helen Thomas got up in the front row, center seat of the White House, 2 feet from the president, and she said, it was a deliberate massacre on the high seas by the Israelis against peace activists. And that would be the last time she stood, sat, or spoke in the White House of our capital. That night. That night, my son had some time. We put up the video. It was a Thursday night, Friday morning, 2 in the morning. Everything always takes 7 hours longer. When it'll take 10 minutes, 7 hours later, still putting it up. So we put it up, sent it out to a couple of bloggers, sent it to a couple of news people, see what happens. He goes off for a Shabbaton, for a Sabbath weekend with some teenagers. I shut down the computer for Shabbat, for the Sabbath. Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, I turn on the computer to see if anybody looked at it. At that point, I had over 700,000 views. And that's just the people that didn't observe Shabbos. Oh, by Sunday, the whole Shabbos observing world. So Sunday, Monday it went mainstream. My son is off at school, my wife and daughter are out of the house. I'm sitting at my son's little desk in his room with the soccer wallpaper on the bedroom, sitting there looking at the computer. And we're getting emails like this. Thousands and thousands a second. Thousands and thousands. Ultimately, we had 25 to 30,000 hate mails and death threats. We had to have a safe room in the house to open our mail. We had a Homeland Security box with antenna with remote control in case somebody broke in. We had the windows down for 2 years. We had to be trained by a certain agency of how to get out of our house and drive around and look under it and all that. There's a whole to do. It just started that day. The other thing that started that day was every single person in the press corps in the world wanted to know who was the guy behind the camera. This was a big story, not just because it's about Israel, not just because it's about the flotilla, but it's about a journalist. The journalists write about journalists, certainly the biggest journalist that put a foot in her mouth or she's an anti-Semite or whatever they wanted to find out, and they wanted to find out who's the guy with the camera. We never heard of him. So every single news agency, from German television to Brazilian magazines, everybody in these contacted me to want to interview me and talk to me. I'm overwhelmed sitting there. Did I open a Pandora's box? What do I do with this? I said, this would be a good time for some hashgacha pratis, divine providence, maybe. And the phone rang. It was Ari Fleischer, former President Bush's press secretary. This'll do. He calls me up, he says, Yasher Koch, Rabbi Nesenoff, good job! What can I do for you? I told him what's going on, he gave me some advice. Ultimately, he told me about who to talk to, what not to do. It was very difficult to get his arms around, but he did give me one very specific thing he said to me, very important. He said, you have to have a message. If you get interviewed, you don't have a message, they'll make a message. Not only that, you're a rabbi, you're a Jew, you're about to talk to the whole world. It's an opportunity, what do you want to say? I said to him, Ari, what do I want to say? He said, David, you got to figure it out, man. So I thank him very much. I've spoken to him many times since then. He's a wonderful man. My son comes home from school. I tell him, Ari Fleischer called. My son says, I know, I told him to call you. Who is this kid? So I figured I'd ask him. I said, yeah, he told us that we have to figure out what our message is. I figured he's a smart kid. I said, what's our message? My son said, we're not smart enough to figure that out. We have to get some advice. Well, who should we call? My son said, I see what's going on my phone with the emails. Everybody in the world knows this story. If you want to get some advice, you can call anybody you want. They'll take your call today. Everybody knows this story. So, well, I don't know about that. He said, who do you want to call? I'll get him on the phone. Everybody knows the story. So I thought, who do I want to call for advice? It's about anti-Semitism. It's about the White House. It's about Germany and Poland. I said one name. Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel. My son leaves the room. I am telling you, it was seconds. He comes in. Elie Wiesel. Professor Wiesel, but if you ever talk to him, it's Wiesel. Okay, Professor Wiesel. So, Yasher Koch, Rabbi Nesenoff, good job. I know he sounds like Ari Fleischer, but I can only do one imitation. Says, so I said to him, I'm getting a lot of hate mail. He said, I get a lot of that too. I think, if someone's going to get hate mail, it's going to be Elie Wiesel. So he did give me a piece of advice, just as a separate note from anything else, but sometimes people in the audience, on a serious note, find it of interest, getting from a Holocaust survivor. He did say, when you start to lose strength, that is precisely the moment that you're supposed to be gaining strength. It's a good thing to remember. Put it away somewhere. God forbid you should need such advice. When you start to lose strength, that's the moment you should start gaining the strength. So I finally did ask him, I wanted what my message is. Okay? This is a Nobel laureate. He speaks from the museum in Washington to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem to every place in Europe, biggest speaker around. What's my message? And he says to me something very odd. He says, I read about you in the newspaper this morning. Yeah. He says, I heard that you daven, you pray at Chabad. So, yeah, I pray at Chabad. I'm a Chabadnik, yeah. I mean, even as a conservative rabbi, you need a minion, right? Yeah. So, they want some kosher food, Well, people always ask me how I made the change from conservative to Chabad, like it's some big story. It's a very simple story. A guy came over to me and said, do you like cake? I said, I like cake. It's your story, it's your story. It's the boy's story tonight who spoke, young man from Maryland. Yeah, I like cake. So what was I talking about? So he says to me, I read in the paper that you daven at Chabad. I said, yes, I'm a Chabadnik. He says, you're looking for a message. Why don't you find out what the Lubavitcher Rebbe would have wanted you to say? I thank Professor Wiesel very much. I've spoken to him sometimes since then. He's a very nice man. Next morning, I show up at my Chabad Minyan morning prayer service. Of course, now I'm a big macha. There's a guy carrying my talis bag, my tefillin bag. I'm walking in. The whole thing is very different. So I have no time for anything. I'm on the phone the entire time. During the davening. I have no time for. I say, tie me up. I'll say amen. So